In 1961, a father in rural Ohio handed his 10-year-old son a single-shot .22 and said 4 words before letting him touch the trigger: "The muzzle is a promise." The boy carried that promise for 70 years and never broke it. Today, most people think gun safety was invented in a classroom with a slideshow. The truth is older and quieter. Number 14 has saved more lives than any safety switch ever built. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 20 forgotten gun safety rules every American boy knew before his first shot. Number 20. Every gun is loaded, even when it isn't. This was the first rule because it was the rule that made all the others possible. Before a boy was ever allowed to hold a rifle, his father drilled one sentence into him until it stopped being a sentence and became a reflex. There is no such thing as an unloaded gun. It did not matter that you had just checked the chamber. It did not matter that the box of shells was still on the shelf. You handled every firearm every single time as if it were one careless motion away from going off. The genius of the rule was psychological. It removed the most dangerous moment in all of shooting, the moment a man relaxes because he believes the gun is safe. That belief has killed more people than malice ever did. A boy who treated a cold, empty .22 with the same respect as a loaded 12 gauge never had to unlearn a bad habit at the worst possible second. His hands simply knew, and hands that know do not make the mistake that ends a family. Number 19, never point the muzzle at anything you are not willing to destroy. Fathers said it plainer than the manuals did. They would tell a boy, if you would not be happy to put a hole clean through it, do not let your barrel cross it. Not the dog, not the truck window, not your brother's back as he walked ahead of you through the corn. The rule treated the muzzle like a live thing, with a will of its own, something you had to shepherd every second it was in your hands. A boy learned to feel where his barrel was pointed the way he felt where his own feet were. Into the dirt, into the sky, into the empty field, never toward a living thing, unless the decision to shoot had already been made in his mind. This was harder than it sounds, because a rifle is long and a boy is careless, and a barrel swings when you turn to answer a question. The ones who mastered it were the ones whose fathers corrected them the very first time, quietly, a hand on the barrel, pushing it down toward the ground. No shouting, just that way, always that way. Number 18, keep your finger off the trigger until the sights are on the target. There is a groove along the side of every rifle, above the trigger guard, and that is where a boy was taught to rest his trigger finger, straight and flat, from the moment he picked the gun up until the very instant he decided to fire. Not curled inside the guard, waiting, straight along the frame, outside. The reason was the startle reflex, though no father used that phrase. What they knew was simpler. When a man trips, when a bird flushes suddenly, when something crashes in the brush, his hands clench. All of them, at once, involuntarily. If a finger is inside the trigger guard when that happens, the gun fires into whatever the muzzle happens to be crossing. A boy who kept his finger indexed along the frame could stumble down a whole hillside and never touch off a round. This was the rule that separated the trained from the untrained more clearly than any other. And old-timers could spot a greenhorn across a whole field just by watching where his finger sat. Number 17, cross the fence with an empty gun. Every farm was stitched with barbed wire, and every hunt meant climbing over it a dozen times. This was the moment fathers feared most, because a boy going over a fence has both hands full, his balance is gone, and his gun is doing whatever gravity tells it to. So the rule was iron. Before you touch that fence, you unload every round out of the chamber and the magazine. Then you lay the open, empty rifle on the ground on the far side, muzzle pointed away, or you hand it butt first to the man already across. Only when you were over, standing on 2 feet, did you pick it back up and reload. It cost 30 seconds. 30 seconds against a lifetime of never being the man who shot himself climbing a fence in his own back 40. Country newspapers in the 50s and 60s carried the stories that made this rule real. The ones about hunters found dead beside a fence post with their own gun. Every father had read one. Every father made sure his son never became one. Number 16, look down the barrel before you load. Not with your eye at the muzzle, never that. You broke the action open, held the breech up to the light, and looked through the bore to make sure it was clear. A plug of mud from a dropped rifle, a wad of snow packed in from a fall, even a forgotten cleaning patch could turn a barrel into a pipe bomb the instant a round was fired behind an obstruction. The pressure had nowhere to go, so it went sideways, splitting the steel and driving it back into the shooter's face and hands. Boys learned this the way they learned everything, from a father who had seen a burst barrel once and never forgot the sound. If you dropped your gun in the field, even for a second, you stopped and you checked the bore before you loaded again. No exceptions, no assumptions. A single glance through the barrel toward the sky was cheaper than an eye. Number 15, the safety is a machine and machines fail. Fathers taught their sons to use the safety to keep it on until the moment before firing, but they taught them something more important underneath it. Never trust it. A safety is a small piece of metal that blocks the trigger or the firing pin, and small pieces of metal wear, break, freeze, and slip. A boy who believed the safety made his gun harmless would let his muzzle wander, would let his finger drift, would get sloppy because the little switch told him it was fine. The rule cut that lie off at the root. The safety is a backup for good habits, never a substitute for them. Handle the gun exactly as carefully with the safety on as you would with it off, because someday the safety will be off when you thought it was on, or it will fail on the very shot that mattered. The boys who lived to be old men were the ones who never once let a mechanical switch do the job their own discipline was supposed to do. Number 14, be sure of your target and be sure of what lies beyond it. Here is the rule that has quietly saved more lives than any other on this list. A bullet does not stop when it hits what you aimed at. A .22 long rifle round can travel more than a mile. A deer rifle round will carry for 2 or 3. So a boy was taught to see not just the animal in his sights, but the whole world behind it. The ridgeline, the empty sky which was safe, versus the flat hillside, which was not, because a hillside is where a farmhouse sits and a child plays. You did not shoot at a sound. You did not shoot at a patch of brown that moved. You identified your target completely, and then you asked the second question that most people forget, which is, where does this bullet go if I miss, or if it passes through? If the answer was a road, a barn, a house, or anything you could not see clearly, you did not take the shot. The best hunters in America are known not for the shots they made, but for the thousands they let walk away, because the background was wrong. Number 13, never shoot at water or flat, hard surfaces. A boy who skipped a stone across a pond understood Ricochet before he ever understood the word. A bullet does the same thing, only it does not slow down and it does not lose its shape. It comes screaming off the surface at a shallow angle and flies for hundreds of yards in a direction nobody can predict. Water, flat rock, frozen ground, a road, the side of a metal tank, all of them turned a bullet into a wild thing with a mind of its own. So the rule was, you shoot into a backstop, a dirt bank, a hillside, something soft that swallows the round and holds it. You never fired across a still pond to watch the splash, no matter how much a boy wanted to. Fathers who let their sons plink at cans made sure those cans sat against an earthen bank, never propped on a rock or a fence rail where the mist would sing off into the neighbor's land. A ricochet has killed men standing well off to the side of the shooter, people who thought they were in no danger at all. First pattern break. Here is where the whole thing gets bigger than a list of rules. What was really happening when a father handed his son that first .22 was not a lesson in mechanics. It was a transfer of trust, and both of them knew it. In 1,000 small towns across America, the first shot was a rite of passage, as real as a first job or a first car, older than either. It meant a father had watched his boy long enough to believe he could hold a deadly thing and not be reckless with it. The hunter safety courses that spread across the country, starting in the late 1940s, first in New York, then state by state through the 50s and 60s, put these rules on paper and made them law for young hunters. But the paper only wrote down what fathers and grandfathers and uncles had already been teaching in the field for generations. The classroom certificate was the state's version. The real course was walking a fence line beside a man who corrected your muzzle without a word and expected you to remember. That is the education we have mostly lost, not the rules, the relationship that carried them. Number 12, wear something over your ears and your eyes. This one came harder in the old days because a certain kind of man thought protection was for the soft. But the wise fathers knew better, and they made their boys wear it from the first shot. The crack of a rifle, and worse, the roar of a shotgun, does permanent damage to a boy's hearing on the very first pull. And it stacks up, shot after shot, year after year, until an old hunter cannot hear his grandchildren across the dinner table. The eyes mattered too. Hot gas, a blown primer, a fragment of a case, a ricocheting pellet, a branch snapping back. Any of it could take a shooting eye in an instant. Cheap glasses and a set of muffs or even wax plugs were nothing against a lifetime of hearing and sight. The boys whose fathers insisted on it grew into old men who could still hear the turkey gobble and still see the buck at the tree line. The ones who went without spent their later years reading lips and squinting. Number 11, carry only the ammunition that matches your gun. A boy learned early that a rifle or shotgun is built for one cartridge and one only, stamped right on the barrel, and that mixing them up was a way to die. A 20 gauge shell will slide right past the chamber of a 12 gauge and lodge in the barrel, and if a 12 gauge shell is then loaded and fired behind it, the gun bursts in your hands. It happened often enough that the 20 gauge shell was made yellow so nobody would confuse it, and every father pointed that out. The rule went beyond gauge. You checked the caliber on the barrel and you carried only that. You never dropped a stray round of the wrong size into your pocket alongside the right ones, because pockets get dark and hands get careless, and the wrong cartridge finds its way into the chamber at exactly the wrong moment. A boy was taught to keep his ammunition sorted, labeled, and separate. One gun, one box, no mixing. The discipline seemed excessive right up until the day it wasn't. Number 10, unload before you come inside. The gun came home empty. Before a boy stepped into the truck, before he walked up the porch, before he leaned that rifle in the corner behind the kitchen door, he opened the action and cleared it, chamber and magazine both, and he showed his father the empty breech. Most household shootings did not happen in the field. They happened in the living room, the mudroom, the bedroom. When someone picked up a gun they thought was empty, and it wasn't. The rule closed that door completely. A gun that crossed the threshold of the house was a gun with its action open and nothing in it. Every time, no matter how tired everyone was, no matter how cold it was outside. Fathers made a ritual of it, a visual check that both of them performed, because a habit you do out loud and in front of someone else is a habit that sticks. The boys raised this way grew up and did the same thing in their own doorways, muttering the check to themselves out of pure muscle memory 40 years later. Number 9, guns in one place, ammunition in another. When the day was done and the gun was cleaned, it went to its place, and the shells went to theirs, and the two were never stored together, where a curious child could turn one into the other. This was the rule that protected the youngest ones in the house, the little brothers and sisters too young for their own first shot. A rifle alone is a heavy stick. A box of shells alone is a rattle. It takes both together in small hands to make a tragedy, and separating them by so much as a locked drawer broke the chain. Fathers kept the guns high or in a cabinet, or later in a proper safe when those became common. And they kept the ammunition somewhere else entirely, in the workshop, in a different closet, under a different lock. It was not about mistrust. It was about the simple arithmetic of accidents, which is that most of them need 2 ingredients, and any parent who kept those 2 ingredients apart had already prevented the thing before it could ever begin. Number 8, know your zone of fire when you hunt beside another man. Once a boy graduated to hunting with others, walking a field abreast with his father and an uncle and a cousin, he learned that each man owned a slice of the sky and the ground in front of him and nothing more. Your zone was the wedge directly ahead, and you did not swing your gun outside it ever, no matter how good the shot looked, because outside your wedge stood the men walking the line with you. A pheasant flushing low and cutting to the side was a bird you let fly, because to follow it with your barrel meant sweeping it across a friend. This is the rule that turned an individual's discipline into a group's survival. Every man trusted every other man to hold his own lane, and that trust was only as good as the youngest, greenest shooter in the line. A boy who could not be relied upon to keep his muzzle in his own zone did not get invited back. He hunted alone until he learned, or he did not hunt at all. Second pattern, break. Now here is the part nobody wants to hear. The reason these rules feel forgotten is not that the danger went away. It is that we quietly decided the whole culture that carried them was somehow suspect. And in throwing out the arguments, we threw out the education too. But look at the rules themselves, stripped of everything else. Every single one is about restraint, about the shots you do not take, about the trigger you do not touch, about the caution you show a thing precisely because it is powerful. A boy who learned these rules was not being taught to be dangerous. He was being taught the exact opposite, that with a deadly tool in your hands, the measure of a man is what he refuses to do with it. That is a lesson that reaches far past hunting. It is a lesson about power and patience and consequence, about the weight of holding something that cannot be taken back once it leaves your control. We used to hand that lesson to 10-year-olds along with a single-shot .22 and a box of shells. Some families still do. They understand something the rest of us have started to forget. Number 7, never mix a gun with a drink. This rule was absolute, and there was no bending it. Not one beer, not a nip against the cold from the flask in the truck. A firearm and alcohol did not touch on the same day, and the flask stayed home until the guns were cleaned and put away and the hunt was over. Fathers who would take a drink themselves at the end of the night made this crystal clear to their sons, because they had seen what happens when judgment softens and reflexes slow with a loaded rifle still in a man's hands. Alcohol makes a careless man out of a careful one, and carelessness with a gun is measured in lives, not spills. A boy learned that the celebration came after, round the table, with the story of the day when the steel was locked away. The field was for sober men only. This was one of the few rules that carried no gray area at all, no judgment call, no it depends. You were either dry or you did not carry, and every good man in that boy's life held the same line. Number 6, know exactly how your gun works before you ever load it. A boy did not get to fire a single round until he could work the action in his sleep. How to open it, how to close it, where the safety sat and which way pushed it on, how to tell at a glance whether the chamber held a round, how to unload it cleanly without touching the trigger. He practiced all of it dry, with the gun empty, and checked twice until the motions were smooth and certain. The reason was that a fumbling, uncertain shooter is a dangerous one. A boy who did not know his own gun would point it at himself, trying to see why it jammed, would touch the trigger, trying to figure out the safety, would panic when it didn't behave. Fathers made their sons learn one gun completely before moving to the next, and they never handed a boy an unfamiliar firearm and told him to figure it out in the field. You mastered the tool on the workbench, cold and empty and calm, so that in the moment that mattered, your hands already knew every answer. Number 5, pass a gun with the action open, muzzle away. There was a whole small ceremony to handing a firearm from one person to another, and a boy learned every step of it. You did not just hold out a loaded rifle. You opened the action so the other man could see straight into the empty chamber with his own eyes. You kept the muzzle pointed in a safe direction the entire time, and you handed it over that way, open and obviously clear. The man receiving it looked, saw for himself, and only then accepted it. 2 sets of eyes on one empty chamber. It seems like a lot of ceremony for handing a boy a .22, but that ceremony is exactly why nobody got shot passing a gun over a truck bed or through a doorway. The open action made the gun's condition a visible fact instead of a spoken assumption, and assumptions are what kill people around firearms. A boy who was handed guns this way his whole childhood grew up unable to accept a closed, unchecked gun from anyone. His hands would not take it until he saw the chamber. That instinct is worth more than any lock. Number 4, the muzzle points down or the muzzle points up, but the muzzle never points at a man. Fathers taught their sons specific ways to carry a gun through the field. And every one of them was designed around the same idea that no matter how you held it, the barrel stayed off of every living person. There was the carry with the muzzle up over your shoulder, safe when nobody walked behind you, and the carry with the muzzle down toward the ground in front of you, safe when nobody walked ahead. There was the cradle carry across the forearm for tired arms on a long walk. The boy learned to switch between them depending on where the other hunters were, always doing the geometry in his head, always making sure that if the gun somehow fired that instant, it would drive a hole into dirt or sky and nothing else. Walking a mile through rough ground with a rifle is a mile of tiny decisions about where the muzzle sits. A boy who made those decisions correctly for years without thinking was a boy who would never, in a lifetime of hunting, sweep his barrel across another human being. Third pattern break. Here is the secret that the modern world is only now rediscovering, and it is number 4, dressed up in different clothes. Everything we call gun safety today, all of it, the 4 rules printed on the range wall, the certifications, the courses, comes down to one idea those old fathers built into their sons at the level of instinct. Control the muzzle and control the trigger, and treat every gun as loaded while you do. That is the whole thing. Modern instructors at the best training schools in the country teach exactly what a grandfather taught on a fence line in 1958, only now it costs money and comes with a slideshow. The colonel who formalized the modern 4 rules of gun safety in the 1970s did not invent them. He wrote down cleanly what generations of quiet men had already known. And that is the strange gift buried in this whole list. These rules were never lost. They were passed hand to hand, father to son, so completely and so wordlessly that we stopped noticing they were being taught at all. The tragedy is only that fewer hands are doing the passing now. Number 3, load only when you are ready and unload the moment you are not. Here is the one most first-time shooters still get wrong today because it fights against impatience. A boy was taught that a gun stayed unloaded, action open, until the very moment he was in position and ready to use it, and that the instant he was done, before he took a single step, it came unloaded again. You did not load up at the truck and walk to your stand with a live round in the chamber. You did not keep a gun hot while you climbed, rested, ate your sandwich, or talked with the other men. The chamber stayed empty until the muzzle was pointed where it needed to be, and the decision to shoot was near. This is the rule that impatient shooters break constantly, wanting to be ready, wanting to save the 2 seconds of chambering a round, and it is exactly those 2 saved seconds that fill the accident reports. A boy who loaded late and unloaded early carried a gun that simply could not go off during all the fumbling, walking, resting parts of the day when accidents actually happen. The old men made it a rhythm: ready, load, done, unload, every single time. Number 2, respect the recoil and mount the gun right or it will hurt you. This one saved a boy's shoulder, his cheekbone, and his nerve. A rifle or shotgun kicks, and a boy who held it wrong, loosely, out away from his body, or with his thumb wrapped up behind the scope, learned a hard lesson in a hurry. Fathers taught the proper mount before the first shot, the butt pulled in tight against the meat of the shoulder, not resting on the bone, not floating in the air where it could get a running start, the cheek down firm on the stock. The thumb kept clear of the way the gun would rock back. A scope held too close to the eye would come back and open a crescent cut above the brow, a wound so common that shooters have a nickname for it. But the deeper reason for the rule was fear. A boy who got hurt on his first shot, who took a bruise or a bloody nose from a badly held gun, might flinch for the rest of his life, jerking the trigger and closing his eyes in anticipation of pain. A father who taught the mount correctly gave his son not just a comfortable shot, but a calm and steady one, for good. Number 1, always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. This is the rule that sits underneath all the others, the promise that Ohio father spoke before he let his son touch the trigger. And if a boy learned only this one, learned it so deep it became part of how he moved through the world, he could break every other rule on this list and still never hurt a living soul. Because a gun pointed at the dirt or the sky cannot kill a person, no matter what else goes wrong. The safety can fail, the chamber can hold a round you forgot, the trigger can catch on a branch, the whole gun can malfunction in your hands, and none of it matters if the muzzle was pointed at the ground the entire time. Every accidental discharge in the history of shooting became a tragedy only because the muzzle was pointed at something that mattered. The old fathers knew this in their bones, which is why muzzle control was the first thing they taught and the last thing they would forgive a boy for forgetting. The muzzle is a promise, that Ohio man said. A promise that wherever this barrel points, you are willing to accept what happens there. A boy who kept that promise for 70 years kept it because his father made him keep it on the very first day, before the very first shot, when it counted most. Here's my challenge. If you were raised around guns, teach one of these rules to someone this week the way it was taught to you, out loud, with your hands. Show a kid the open action. Push a wandering muzzle toward the ground without a word. Pass a gun the right way and make them look at the empty chamber. Then drop a comment and tell me which rule your father or grandfather burned into you first, because I want to know if muzzle control gets more love than the fence rule. These were never just rules. They were a promise handed down, one careful man at a time, and the promise only survives if we keep making it.